You're up.
Final Fantasy VII Remake is finally here, and with it come tons of expectations. Many people think this is going to win Game of the Year, and in this review we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the gameplay, the story, how it all is, and what we think about it. First up, let's start out with story and setting. This is arguably the strongest aspect of the game. The story is phenomenal, the setting's phenomenal, makes you really feel like Final Fantasy VII. It really immerses you into the game world, and this is something I think people are going to be really, really happy with. It doesn't take you more than a few seconds of watching gameplay to have your mind blown, and you know exactly immediately what game it is, what universe this is, and you can't help but just fall in love with it immediately. Even though this is the strongest aspects of the game, there are a couple things that probably took it away from getting a perfect score in this department, and those are, some of the characters are a bit much. It really works in some places in the game where you're just like, this is hilarious, but in a lot of cases it's just kind of out of place. Mostly the female characters, I've noticed, they always seem cheerful and upbeat all the time, regardless that the sky is falling and the world is coming to an end. They're just like, this is great! And it's really kind of like, I realize it's the Final Fantasy way to do it, and Final Fantasy purists are probably like, whatever, that's fine. But, you know, to your average gamer that's just like, oh, let me check out Final Fantasy VII, I like RPGs, I like action RPGs and JRPGs, you're kind of going to be like, I'm not so sure. The other thing that really got my attention in a negative way is that the world kind of feels static. This is a big complaint I had with Code Vein as well. They developed this great, big, beautiful world, but it's got a lot of straightaways with nothing going on in it. There's no motion, the ground doesn't move when you walk through it, the wind's never blowing, nothing moves, there's no motion. And so it really distracts you kind of in a way that where you're like, how come nothing moves? It doesn't feel like a very alive universe in some ways, even though it's breathtaking to look at. You just wish there was a little more motion involved. Moving on to gameplay. The gameplay of Final Fantasy VII Remake for me was the weakest aspect. That's not to say it was bad, it just wasn't as strong as the story and setting or the audio visuals. It was just kind of weaker in this area, and let me explain why. Let's start with the combat. The combat is very hit or miss. In some moments, it's utterly brilliant, and you're just like, holy shit, I can't believe I did that. That was mind-blowing and totally fun. The effects are spectacular and over the top with the summons. You really, really love it sometimes. And there are other moments that are just utterly terrible. Particularly when there are a lot of enemies on the screen, the camera tends to, when you move the camera to look around, it changes what you're locked on, so that can be frustrating, particularly when you're first learning the mechanics. But also, the game has a really hard time dealing with a lot of enemies at once. For instance, if you're playing one of the characters, whichever one you're controlling, all the enemies seem to attack you more often than not, so the character you're on is just constantly getting beat up by everything, and then you have to switch off to the character to another character, and then it gets ganged up on and you keep switching, and this just forces you to switch around. And one thing that's really kind of frustrating about it is the AI for your companions and for Cloud when you're not playing them is really bad. It's really simplistic. Sometimes they'll just stand there and block, other times they'll just do basic attacks. And I think this is something that maybe they didn't take fully into consideration when they were turning this from a turn-based to a real-time game, is that there has to be some sort of functioning AI that's a little bit better than it has, so that you can feel free to play the character you're playing and not constantly worry about what everyone else is doing. I feel like this was a design choice by the devs. They were probably making it so that the characters did minimal activity so that you felt like you were in control of each character, but it doesn't always translate well. Sometimes it's amazing, other times it doesn't translate quite as well. Final Fantasy VII also has lots of mini-games, for better or worse. If you like mini-games and different sorts of games to do within a game, full of that. That's pretty typical for Final Fantasy games, so that's all there. I'm sure Final Fantasy purists will love to hear that. And there are a lot of sort of like puzzles, if you will, that you need to do throughout the course of the game. They're not challenging, like you don't really have to think about it all that much, and the game basically drives you through them, so it's not like you're going to sit there and go like, how do I do this? The game's like, here's how you do this. And they add something to the game, but I'm not sure if it makes the game better or worse. It depends on what kind of player you are, but it does add a bit of variety. In terms of customization, just talking like RPG mechanics here, there is quite a bit of customization for each character. It's not as much as you'd hope for, probably, given the way Final Fantasy VII was, or, some modern action RPGs. But there is a lot of customization. One thing that's particularly new is you can upgrade your weapons by giving them passive skills, and you get to pick which skills you want based on the skill points that you spend. So you can sort of steer your characters in a given direction that you want them to do. And you can also learn skills from each weapon, so it gives you a reason to really try out different weapons and see what they do, because not all of them do the same thing. Some of them have different moves, and this is a really cool aspect to the game and one that I really, really liked. When it comes to materia specifically, I feel like they did a very good job of preserving Final Fantasy VII as much as possible with this regard. It really feels like Final Fantasy VII when you're using the spells and the way they work, so this was really, really cool to see. In the audio, visual, and design category, let's start with design first. So the game kind of feels like, particularly early on, almost like you're on a train ride. There's no way to get off, you're just going down a track, and you're playing straightforward, you're not going off doing side quests or anything. You're just kind of following the main quest down, you'll get a couple side quests, and then it's right back to on that track, just going like a train all the way down, for better or worse. Sometimes you see this beautiful scenery and you want to get off and explore it, but you can't, and other times you feel compelled to go forward because the story is pulling you through and you want to keep going. So it's kind of a mixed bag there. Some players are really going to like it. Some people are going to be like, I wish it was more open world and you could kind of go do your own thing at your own pace, but it is what it is.
Don't be shy, little kitten. Shimmy on over and give Daddy some sugar. No need to play coy. Nobody here but you and me. Oh, you're even cuter than I thought.
Back off.
Ooh! This kitten's got claws! I love
When it came to the voice acting for the game, I found it to be pretty average. I don't think it was bad or good. The characters, you'll notice, sound very over the top. I think that's just the way Final Fantasy is designed. And in some places in the game, it's just fucking brilliant. So I think people are going to either love this or hate this, depending on whether you're a Final Fantasy VII fan. If you're a Final Fantasy VII fan, you're like, this is great. If you're not, you're probably going to be like, I don't know, the acting doesn't sound as good as it could be. The sound effects for the game are utterly spectacular. They really immerse you into the game. The game is over the top with sound and graphics. So this is something I think people are really, really going to enjoy. The music starts out a little bit kind of like meh at the beginning, and it just gets better and better throughout the course of the game. And by the end, you're just kind of like, wow, this is like, the soundtrack was amazing. When it comes to visuals, the game is absolutely beautiful to look at. Playing on PlayStation 4, it's pushing the console's limit of what's possible. I don't think anyone's going to complain here. I think the nitpickiest thing you could say, if you really want to get nitpicky, is that looking at the character models very closely, they don't look anything that special. But everything else is just so perfect and so good. I have no complaints whatsoever in this department. Moving along to price point, this game is exceptionally good value for the money. You're going to get about 50 hours out of this game if you play through the whole thing, which you should. Which is pretty goddamn good for $60 these days. Most $60 AAA titles, let's take God of War for example, here's a good one, is about 25 hours, 20 to 25 hours, so you're going to get double that. And few games in modern history have the production value of Final Fantasy VII. So you're not only getting the length, but you're getting the production value. Again, God of War is in that category of production value, but again, the length is about half. Now you might like God of War more than you like Final Fantasy VII, but it's in that category in terms of production value. So I think hands down the price point for this game is bang on. I don't think anyone can argue that they're not going to get their money's worth. Some final thoughts for this review. It's kind of a slow burn. The game starts off very, very slowly, and it doesn't really pull you in until about 10 hours or so. You're kind of wandering around doing these really not spectacular quests that are kind of childish, and the game has a very childish feel at the beginning, and it makes you kind of wonder who the audience of the game was designed for. Is it designed for the teenager in us that played Final Fantasy VII, or is it designed for the adult us that played Final Fantasy VII Remake now and wants to see a more adult version? So you're kind of wondering that as you start to play the game, but as you get further and further into the game, it definitely takes an adult turn and gets into some crazy stuff. I don't want to spoil anything, but it's definitely aimed at adults as it gets later into the game. I think one thing that stuck out particular to me in this game that maybe many games have not done for me, there's just some amazing moments in the game that you just couldn't help but smile or laugh. You literally found yourself laughing and smiling, and that doesn't happen very often in gaming these days. Games are very serious, you know, you're playing a competitive shooter, it's serious, or you're playing an action RPG and it's very serious. This game made me laugh, it made me smile, and I think that's something very special about the game, and I hope other people do as well. So is Final Fantasy VII Remake Game of the Year? For me, it's probably not Game of the Year. I'm a more serious action RPG, classic RPG player, and this game has a more lighthearted feel and is more probably action-adventure RPG. It's more a mashup of those three genres than it is action RPG or adventure RPG or JRPG. It's kind of has a bit of adventure to it, so doing things like the puzzles and stuff weren't really for me, but I think a lot of people are going to love that. And I think if you're a Final Fantasy VII fan, you're going to absolutely love this game. That said, if you're not a Final Fantasy VII fan, if you're somebody who's gotten caught up in the hype and is like, this looks amazing, everyone says it's going to be amazing, it's not going to be as great for you. Because the gameplay is a weaker aspect or the weakest aspect of the game, not saying it's bad, it's just the weakest, if you are not familiar with the story or Final Fantasy at all, you're going to be relying on that gameplay to sort of get you into the story, and I don't think it's going to do it for you. So if you're not a fan of Final Fantasy VII, you still might like the game, but odds are you're probably going to be on the fence about it, and there's going to be some points that are frustrating for you, and maybe the story isn't quite as good because you just don't know what it's all about. With these things in mind, I think if you're a Final Fantasy VII fan or just a Final Fantasy fan in general, you're going to absolutely love this game. This game was made for you. It represents Final Fantasy VII exceptionally well. Go ahead and get this game. This is a day one buy for you. If you're not a Final Fantasy fan or not a Final Fantasy VII fan, I think it's a lot harder to say if you're going to enjoy this game as much as you want. I would suggest going and, watching gameplay, drop by streams on launch day, look at the game, ask questions, interact with people, go watch tons of gameplay before you decide, because I don't think it's a definite yes or no for you. You're probably going to fall somewhere in the middle, and it might be a yes for you, and it might be a wait for sale game for you. So that's my opinion on that, and that's Final Fantasy VII Remake Review.